Hi, thank you all for being here. I'm really excited to talk about disability benefits. I know it's kind of a mythical area of public benefits and the law, so really excited to dive right in. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen quickly. Okay, can you all see that? All right, fabulous. So my name is Sarah. I am one of the attorneys at Atticus. So we are a public interest law firm that really focuses on disability benefits. So we provide free legal advice for folks who are at any stage in the disability benefits application process. And we are essentially a resource center for folks who are at any stage of that. So I'm going to let my colleague Megan, who is joining me today, also introduce herself, and we can go ahead and get started.
Thank you. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan. I am the case manager and social work liaison at Atticus. So I just handle a lot of the day-to-day communications, working with patients and clients, answering questions, just providing any support to you all or any of the folks you send our way. I've also worked in social work and helped, worked as a non-attorney rep with Social Security. So I've done hundreds of these applications, and I kind of use that experience to help folks, like Sarah was saying, navigate the process.
So what we're going to do today is talk about Social Security disability benefits, both SSI and SSDI at a super high level. We're going to talk about eligibility for the programs, what it looks like to apply, kind of special considerations that are worth thinking about. And there will likely be a ton of questions. So we will save some time for questions at the end. Also, if you throw a question in the chat, Megan will be manning that to answer things as they come up as well. But if we don't mind, I'd love to start with a couple polls about where you're how long you've been practicing and what your familiarity is like with these disability benefit programs.
Can folks see the poll? Is it popping up?
Yes.
Thank you all.
That's great. So most of you have been practicing for over 10 years. That is fantastic. I'm really hopeful this can still be useful to you all, even if you're seasoned vets, but really excited to talk about this.
And if folks for some reason can't see the poll on the screen or can't answer, the first question was asking how long you'd been in practice. And the second question was asking how familiar you are with Social Security disability benefits, from not familiar to very familiar on a scale.
Okay, that's great. So we are kind of all over the board here. Most people either somewhat familiar or familiar, but not too many people on the not familiar side, not too many people on the very familiar side. Great, that's fantastic to hear. Hopefully this will be helpful to you all. Please don't hesitate to ask questions. We love to answer questions. It certainly makes it more interesting of a conversation, and anytime we can provide information that's more useful for you all specifically, I think that's a big win. So please don't hesitate to ask questions. Like I said, we'll leave some time at the end for them. And then also Megan will be manning the chat to kind of talk about things as they come up. So taking a big step back, what in the world are disability benefits? Why are we here? What are we talking about? So when we talk about disability benefits, we're really talking about two different types of federal benefit systems. The first is Social Security Disability Insurance, SSDI. The second is Supplemental Security Income, SSI. Both of these programs are designed for folks who struggle to work due to medical conditions that make it difficult for them to kind of handle day-to-day tasks or functionality in both a work setting and if they're younger, if they're children in a school setting. It is confusing because although the medical evaluations are similar for both of them, your eligibility and what you get if you are awarded these benefits are different between the two. And people generally refer to them interchangeably. So somebody might say, I want disability benefits. They can be referring to either SSDI or SSI. On top of that, you can apply for both at the same time, and you can be on both at the same time. So there is a ton of overlap, but the eligibility is quite distinct. So Social Security Disability Insurance. This is designed for folks who have worked and paid taxes in the past. Every time that you get a paycheck and it's got that little line taken out that is your FICA taxes, those are going to Social Security Disability. So it is really designed like a private insurance company in that you are paying into it every month. And should you need it, it is there for you to access. Folks who are awarded these benefits get a higher monthly stipend than SSI, up to about $3,300 a month cash in hand, as well as Medicare. At the end of 2021, the average monthly payment was about $1,358. So it's not super common for folks to get the full $3,300. Supplemental Security Income, SSI. This is designed for folks who have very little income, very little assets right now. You do not need to have worked a single day in your life to be eligible for SSI. It is designed much similar to a traditional public benefits program, where it is really for folks who do not have much income or assets at the date of their application. Provides a much lower monthly stipend, about $800 a month. And folks who receive this benefit get Medicaid. 2021, in December 2021, the average payout was about $584 a month. So again, it's not super common to get to hit the maximum amount of the monthly amount that you could get. And these are absolutely massive benefit programs. Between the two of them, something between like 12 to 16 million Americans are accessing them at any given time. And the US government gives out billions and billions of dollars worth of benefits in these programs. So these are absolutely huge social safety net programs that are really designed for folks who aren't able to work and kind of make a living in a traditional manner. Who is eligible for these programs? So we're going to spend a little bit of time on this slide. These are general rules. There is a lot of different things that come into play when we're talking about eligibility for SSDI or SSI. I always say that there are so many exceptions to these various rules, so many ways that things are played together that I'm really willing to chat with anybody about their specific circumstance because it really does vary from person to person. But these are some general rules about how to determine whether or not somebody is eligible for SSDI or SSI. We'll start with SSDI. So for SSDI, folks need to be under 66 years old. This is largely because SSDI, when you get those benefits, you are just getting your retirement benefits early. So when you hit 66, you get that Social Security retirement, whatever amount of money you would get post getting that retirement at 66 and above. When you are eligible for disability benefits, you are just getting those earlier on. So if you are, 30 years old, you get SSDI. that lasts your whole life up until you're 66 and beyond. For that person, when they turn 66, they're not going to see any difference, right? For them, it's going to look exactly the same. For the US government, it's just changing what pot of money it's coming out of. For both SSDI and SSI, regular medical treatment is absolutely necessary. Just anecdotally, I mean, I have talked to hundreds of clients, hundreds of folks who are considering applying for SSDI, SSI. Megan has talked to probably more than that, a ton. I would say that somebody not receiving regular medical treatment is probably the most common reason why I struggle to get somebody sorted with their disability benefits and getting them in the right direction. It is absolutely vital that somebody is receiving that ongoing medical treatment. And that's basically because SSA says, hey, listen, if you're going to come to us and say that you struggle to work, can't go to school because of your medical conditions, we are going to assume that you are receiving treatment for those medical conditions. Now, in practice, does everybody who is unable to go to work for medical conditions, are they all able to access the type of medical care that they need? No. But that is what SSA really looks for in determining whether or not somebody is eligible. When we talk about what types of folks are eligible on a medical basis, really needs to be a diagnosed medical condition that somebody is receiving ongoing treatment for, and that has symptoms that make it difficult for them to work. Specialist treatment is incredibly important, right? I wouldn't say it's 100% necessary. There are scenarios in which maybe somebody reached maximum medical improvement, maybe they see a PCP annually, something like that. But generally, specialist treatment is going to be super important. SSA is going to take that very seriously. If you have a mental health condition, you should be seeing a psychiatrist as well as your kind of therapist or counselor. If you have issues with your heart, you should be seeing a cardiologist, right? So really getting that specialist treatment is key across the board. For both programs, they are designed for folks who are unable to hold down a job for at least a year due to their medical conditions. There's a couple big caveats here. The first is something that I hear all the time from clients, which is they'll call and they'll say something like, I've just hit my 1 year of being out of work. I'm finally eligible for disability benefits. And hearing that honestly breaks my heart, because they should have applied for benefits a year ago, right? As soon as you believe that you will be out of work for at least a year, that is when you should be applying for benefits. Do not wait until you have already been out of work for a year. In a little bit, we'll talk about what the application process looks like and how much of a pain it is, frankly. But it takes a long time. And so getting the application started as soon as you believe you will be out of work for a year can be really key to getting those benefits as soon as possible. The other thing when we talk about unable to hold down a job for at least a year is that we are talking about unable to hold down a job for at least a year by SSA's definition. So SSA defines that as something called substantial gainful activity. They say, listen, if you are making less than $1,350 a month before taxes, we're not going to count that as you working for our definition of whether or not you're eligible for disability benefits. I think a good way to remember this is generally, you can't be going to work full time. SSA is going to say, listen, it's clear to us that you're able to work. Generally, you can't be going to work part-time either. However, somebody who is able to, work at the local grocery store 4 hours a week, somebody who's able to mow a neighbor's lawn for a little bit of extra cash in hand, that is not going to make you automatically ineligible for disability benefits. You can be making some money by going to a job. You just can't be above that substantial gainful activity. And SSA averages it over time. One thing that comes up in particular, I think one thing that when Megan and I are talking to clients is a really good indication for us that they should consider applying for disability benefits is when somebody has multiple failed work attempts. So perhaps somebody goes to work, they're able to work 2 weeks, but that just knocks them out. They have to leave their job for a month, 3 weeks, then they try it again, right? That is somebody who is really struggling to hold down that job and should absolutely consider applying for disability benefits. For SSDI, again, we're on that side of this little screen here. You need to have worked and paid taxes for at least 5 of the last 10 years. That is a very general rule. And I say that with a big caveat and smile on my face because, like I said, there are a ton of exceptions that can come into play. If you're under 30, you do not need to hit that 5 of 10 years. They basically measure half of the time between you becoming disabled and you being whatever age you are now divided by, there's an equation that they do that is quite complex. Under 30, exceptions apply. The other big exception where this comes up is if you can prove that when you became disabled or when you had the event that made you disabled, the disabling event, that at that point you were eligible for disability benefits, even if that was years ago. So those are 2 big exceptions, which is, again, why I always say happy to chat with any specific person because it can really vary from person to person. But generally, if somebody has worked and paid taxes for about 5 of the last 10 years, they will be eligible for SSDI. And they do not need to have worked, 5 years in a row. It's just overall. That comes up a lot when we're talking with folks who have had failed work attempts. Maybe they were able to hold down a job for 6 months to a year. They left their job, they were able to go back. If overall in 10 years, they think they've been working for about 5 of those years, they are likely eligible for disability benefits. The last thing when we talk about technical eligibility is your assets. So for SSDI, doesn't matter what your assets are. You can be receiving veterans benefits. You can be receiving short-term disability, long-term disability. You can be a trust fund kid. So long as you are unable to go to work to earn that income, you're going to be eligible for SSDI. Social Security does not care about income that you are receiving passively. They only care about income that you are going to work to earn. So for SSI, so that's SSDI. Like I said, that's the one that's really designed like a more like a private insurance program where you're paying into it every month. On that note, for SSDI, it only matters what your work history is. Doesn't matter about your spouse. Again, as with many things, this is a theme. There are exceptions to that rule, depending on, there are some scenarios in which somebody can access their spouse's benefits, but generally what SSA is looking at is whether you have gone to work, whether you are making 13 or over $13.50 a month. You can be married to somebody who has a full income that will make you ineligible for SSDI. For SSI, this is the other one. This is supplemental security income. You can be any age, right? You could be 0 years old. You could be, in the hospital on your first day of life and be eligible for SSI. You can be 99 years old. Does not matter how old you are because it is not at all tied to your work history. For medical treatment and your ability to work, same rules as SSDI, need to be receiving that regular medical treatment. Specialist treatment is incredibly helpful and need to be unable to hold down a job for at least a year due to those medical conditions. For SSI, what SSA is looking at is, and I know it's confusing because they're all distinct, but all of their acronyms are basically the same. But just when I say SSA, I mean the Social Security Administration, the governing body that's making all of these decisions. SSDI, of course, the Social Security Disability Insurance. SSI, that's supplemental security income. So for SSI, you need to have very little income as a household. So they look at both your income as well as your spouse's income if you are married. And it needs to be from any source whatsoever, including in-kind financial assistance. So a big example of this is if somebody is, I don't know, say 22 years old, so they're an adult, They maybe live with their mom or their dad because they struggle to care for themselves on their own and they don't pay any rent. Social Security will look at the value of that person's room and consider it in-kind financial assistance and consider it part of your income. So they do this absolutely wild, sorry, I don't mean to pontificate about SSA, but they do this wild calculation that is considering uncounted income and counted income. They determine some income as some income is deemed, some income is unearned, some income is earned. So it's more complex in terms of what your income eligibility is than SSDI. They really do a complex calculation to come up with exactly how much money they think you are receiving in income every month. And it doesn't matter if it's passive or active. If you are receiving it and you are able to live off of it, then they will count it as your income. For work history, there are no requirements. Like I said, you need not have worked a day in your life. You do not need to have paid taxes, paid those FICA taxes. For assets, again, similarly, they're really looking at what your assets are today. Pretty safe bet that if you have under $2,000 in your savings account, you are going to be eligible for SSI so long as you meet the other income requirements. That does not include your first home. If you own a second home, they will consider that as an asset. Does not include your first vehicle. If you own a second vehicle, again, they will consider that an asset. Doesn't count your wedding ring. But they do look at every single thing that you are receiving and every single thing that you own when determining whether or not you are eligible for SSI. So these are some common conditions that make somebody eligible for these disability benefits for either SSI or SSDI. This is absolutely not exhaustive, absolutely not. But these are just the types of things that I see quite often. I think a couple things to note here, long COVID. So SSA is starting to consider long COVID cases. Judges are starting to do hearings where they have applicants who are dealing with long COVID. And I think the other big thing that comes up here is that it is pretty infrequent that I speak with somebody and they have one single condition that makes them eligible for disability benefits. Much more often than not, the person I am speaking with has multiple conditions that together, those symptoms make it difficult for them to work. Can be a combination of physical conditions and mental health conditions. SSA considers both. They will consider mental health conditions without any physical conditions accompanying them as well. Although I believe anecdotally, those are harder to get benefits on, but they absolutely do consider those. And chronic conditions are the other big one. So I talk to folks all the time who maybe had quite a common chronic condition, maybe something like diabetes, where for years it was manageable and they didn't need any sort of assistance and they were able to go to work. But then over time, it's become unmanageable. Their symptoms have been exacerbated. It's become harder for them to work. And I think one big thing too that comes up here with this is when we're talking about multiple conditions and how they interact together, we're talking about how they make it difficult for somebody to work, right? That's the main question that SSA wants to know. Are you able to work? Are you able to go to a job? One example of this that came up once that I just think is a really good example of how kind of conditions can interact together to make it difficult for somebody to work, make them eligible for disability benefits, is a long time ago, there was somebody, somebody who was a client or a potential client. They had, I can't remember exactly what their medical conditions were, but they had a medical condition that was very physical, something like a slip disc, herniated disc, and they needed to have surgery. Okay, that was not good. That was all going to be resolved within a year, no problem. The next thing that happened is they were diagnosed with an early stage of cancer. Now, they were anticipating that their cancer was going to be resolved within a year, right? Neither of these conditions on their own would have made them eligible for disability benefits. However, because of their cancer diagnosis, their herniated disc surgery was delayed until much later, until they were fully through all their radiation, whatever other treatment they needed to get. So both of those conditions together made it so that they were going to be out of work for a year. So I think it's always worth, when you're chatting with folks about what medical conditions they're dealing with, whether or not they should consider applying for disability benefits, asking folks what symptoms they're experiencing and then what their conditions are. That can be a really good way to identify, what we're dealing with here. What's the world of medical conditions? Are there multiple, and how are they interacting together to make it difficult for somebody to work, make it so that somebody's going to be out of work for at least a year? The application process. So that's about eligibility, right? Who are we talking about when we're talking about these programs? I think that there are far, far more people out there who are eligible for these programs than are currently accessing them, which is one of the reasons why I'm really happy to chat with you all today. Anytime that we can talk about getting folks access to these benefits, that is truly amazing. Like, anytime we can talk about this really makes me happy. So I think there are far, far more people out there who are eligible for these programs than are accessing them. This number, this 1 in 4, this comes from SSA. So SSA thinks that of 20-year-olds who are working today, about 25% of them will need disability benefits in their lifetime before they hit the age of 66. Right now, the average age of an applicant is about 54. So we're talking about folks who are mostly folks who are applying are much older. They're in their 50s, they're in their 60s, and they are much more likely to develop chronic conditions, much more likely to have severe symptoms associated with medical conditions that they might be facing. And it is actually easier to get disability benefits when you're over the age of 50 as well. I always say, when I talk to folks who are over 50, I'm like, I want to talk to you if you have a paper cut. Folks who are over 50, because the way SSA evaluates your application is not whether you can do any job, it's whether you can do the job you have been doing. So you don't need to prove that you can be a silverware wrapper, which is a real job in the SSA's book of jobs. You just need to prove that you can't do the job you have traditionally been doing. The application process. So based on the poll, I imagine this is not going to be news to you that it sucks to apply for disability benefits. You all have enough, sounds like you have experience with folks talking to them about the disability benefit application process. So the initial application is long. You have to provide the initial application. You have to do reports associated with it, work history reports, function reports. And it's full of questions that may not seem complex, but you need to know how to speak like SSA. That's something that Megan always says that I think is exactly right. Megan always says you need to know in these applications how to talk like SSA. For example, one of the questions they might ask you is, what do you do all day? Even if I've sat on the couch all day on a Sunday watching, terrible TV, I still want to answer that question with the productive things that I was able to accomplish. I think that's just a human instinct. So really being honest and being clear about what you are capable of, what you are able to do all day. Good example of this is chatting with somebody who was their judge, I think, asked them, what do they do all day? And they answered it that they were able to clean their kitchen. What they left out was that it took them 4 hours to clean their kitchen because they needed to take breaks, use stools, use other things to help them get through the process, right? Another example of this is one of the attorneys or the legal reps that we work with talks about the story where she was chatting with a client, judge asked them the same thing. What do you do all day? Their application had been denied prior. One of the things they said they were able to do was walk their dog 3 times a day, right? The judge says, what do you mean, right? What do you mean you can walk your dog 3 times a day? That indicates to me that you're able to go to work, able to kind of do that level of functionality. Well, when walking through exactly what it meant to walk their dog 3 times a day, this person said that they would be sitting on the couch in the living room 3 times a day. They would stand up struggling. make their way from the kitchen to from the living room to the kitchen where the back door was, open the back door, let the dog out. They couldn't clean up after the dog or do the dog's business, let the dog back in and go back to the couch, right? That's a very different definition of walking the dog 3 times a day than what the judge was assuming. So really understanding how to speak like SSA, how to be specific about your functionality and your capacity. It takes a long time for the initial application to be processed. The average processing time in 2021 was nearly 6 months. It picked up a lot in 2020 and 2021, of course, because of the pandemic, and so processing times were much slower. But it still takes a long time for that initial application to be processed. If you get a denial at the initial application, right, you continue through the appeals process, you are most likely to get your benefits at the hearing stage. So about 50% of people win at the hearing stage when they are able to go before an administrative law judge, 3 times more likely to win if you have legal representation. So this is kind of a breakdown of the application process itself. I think if there's one thing that you all take from this conversation, one thing you take from this CE, it is to the folks in your community, your moms, your dads, anybody who you are talking with who is in this process of applying for disability benefits, it is to really set the expectation that it is super likely you will get a denial after the initial application. It can be incredibly, incredibly disheartening to put all of your information out there, provide all of that to SSA, get all of your records together, really make a case to SSA about why it's difficult for you to work when you know your own functionality and you know how your medical conditions impact you, and for SSA to respond and say, actually, I think you're fine, I think you can work. So really setting the expectation that unfortunately at this point, it is just par for the course. So this data is from 2017, which is the latest I could find, but about 2.2 million people applied in 2017. 36% of people were denied for a technical reason. So when I went over the eligibility really in depth, those are the types of technical reasons that somebody might get denied. After their initial application, so as we saw, that processing time is long. This is 6 months later. Only about 20% of people are awarded benefits. That means that 80% of people get denied. I mean, that is wild. After the initial application stage, you put in for reconsideration, only 10% of people are awarded benefits at this stage. So at both the initial and reconsideration stage, it's super likely that you are going to get a denial letter. It isn't until you go before an administrative law judge and have a hearing that folks are really able to get their benefits. About 50% of people are approved at this stage, like I said. And there are more steps you can take, right? So if you get denied at the ALJ stage, there's an appeals council that you can go to appeal that decision. You can end up in federal court and go through the federal court system. So there's a lot of stages of appeals that a person can take if they are denied in their application. And I think I talk to folks quite often who told me that they applied 3 years ago, they got an initial denial, they didn't apply again. It's really about moving through the process, right? Continuing through the appeals process, doing that in a timely way. Generally, you've got 60 days between getting a denial and requesting an appeal. So really moving through the process is how folks get their benefits. And when you are granted your benefits, you are granted back pay to the date of your initial application. And we'll go in, it's back pay, again, with all things SSA is more complicated than it seems. But that's a huge deal, right? Even if it takes you 18 months, 2 years to get your benefits, you are accruing those monthly checks as you go through the whole process. That entire time you're accruing that cash. So back pay, what does it look like? We'll start with SSI because it's a lot easier. So for supplemental security income, right, that's the one that's really designed for folks who have low income, low assets. There is no waiting period. As soon as you are approved, the next month, you will begin receiving your monthly check and you will be getting Medicaid. You get back paid at the date of your application, so long as you are deemed disabled by that date. Deemed disabled means the government agrees that your disability you had a disability on that date. SSDI, this is the one that's set up like a private insurance company, where it's based on your work history. There is a 5-month waiting period before you begin receiving payments. And there is a 2-year waiting period after the date you were eligible for the check before you receive Medicare. So that's not from the date of your approval. That's from the date you were eligible for the check. You get back pay to the date of the application, plus up to 1 year, so long as the government agrees you were disabled by that date. So the 2 key dates here are the date the government agrees the disability begins and the date you applied. What is irrelevant for both of these is the date that you are approved in terms of what your back pay looks like. Some specific medical conditions have these waiting periods waived on the SSDI side. There's no broad rule as far as I'm aware about, everybody who's this designation. We'll talk about critical cases in a bit. Critical cases still have the waiting periods generally, is my understanding, but there are some specific medical conditions where the waiting periods are removed. For example, like I think ALS was just added to the list of conditions where there's no 5-month waiting period before receiving benefits. I think chronic kidney diseases, so if you have end-stage renal disease, I believe you're eligible for Medicare immediately. I believe you don't get the 2-year waiting period. So it's really specific to the medical conditions. So that's really complex. So these are just a couple examples, and I won't spend too much time on this slide really reading through it. But my understanding is these slides will be available to you. And so if this is helpful in terms of what it looks like, what examples are for how back pay works, depending on when you were deemed disabled by the government and when you applied for your benefits and when you were granted them. Okay, special considerations. So these cases are critical cases that at the hearing level, right? So you've already gone through the initial application, you've already gone through the reconsideration part of the application, you put in for the hearing level. The hearing office staff will designate your case as critical. At the earlier stages, there is more variety in what is deemed a critical case. Generally, it's pretty safe to say that most of these will be considered critical at all stages, but they just don't have the same specific designation as they do at the hearing level. So super common one, compassionate allowance and terminal illness cases. These are commonly called Calteri cases. They have kind of the same broad meaning, right? Both are situations in which somebody has a very severe medical condition or a terminal illness, where SSA basically says, we're not going to make you prove that you find it difficult to work due to your medical conditions. Just by virtue of having this diagnosis or dealing with these symptoms, we recognize that you're going to find it difficult to work. And so we're going to speed up the application process for you. You're essentially fast-tracked, put to the front of the line of the application process. So compassionate allowance and terminal illness are not the same, but there is considerable overlap between them. Stage 4 cancers, for example, are on both lists. Compassionate allowance cases, they are a designated list by SSA that lists out a bunch of different severe conditions that somebody may have that will make them eligible based on compassionate allowance. TERI, of course, is where somebody's diagnosis is very likely terminal. Another type of case that is generally moved up the line are dire needs cases. So these are cases where the applicant is making a claim that they are without food or without access to food, they're without medical care, or they can't access the medical care that they need due to lack of resources, or they're without shelter or at imminent risk of eviction. I will say that my understanding, just anecdotally, is that it is pretty difficult to show a dire needs case. The circumstances need to be quite severe for somebody to be fast-tracked due to dire needs. Other types of critical cases for vets and service members. So veterans who have a Veterans Affairs rating of 100% permanent and total disability, they will also be fast-tracked. as well as service members who have a medical condition, physical or mental, that they sustain while on active duty after October 1st, 2001. So basically after in the wars post 9/11, if they sustain an injury or illness in as a service member in those situations. So for veterans, these are folks who are, right, they're going to the VA, they're getting their benefits. As soon as they have that 100% P&T rating, they should consider applying for benefits. It doesn't automatically mean they will be eligible for benefits. I would say that I can't think of a scenario in which somebody I spoke with who had 100% P&T rating, I didn't think they would be eligible for benefits though. The last one is folks who are potentially violent. So this is specific to the hearing office stage. Again, there's more variety at the initial and reconsideration when SSA is looking at these applications if they'll be considered critical. But this is if a staffer at the hearing office thinks there's some indication that the claimant is suicidal, homicidal, or may otherwise be potentially violent. I think it's pretty safe to assume that the Calteri, those ones, the dire needs, and the vets and service member critical cases will be considered critical at every stage. The other one that comes up that is really designed for folks who are at the early stages of the case, which I think is quite interesting, not worth spending a lot of time on, but just a little bit interesting, is situations with congressional inquiries. So if there's like a public relation issue that may come up, your case may also be fast-tracked. So just really quickly, wanted to touch base about early retirement. We do get this question a lot about ERB and Social Security disability because they do have some similarities. So early retirement benefits, these are accessible to folks who are otherwise eligible for retirement and are at age 62. Much faster processing time than SSDI, of course, because you are applying essentially for your retirement benefits. However, and this is a huge however, folks who access early retirement benefits get a lower monthly amount per month than folks who wait until they're 66 to access their retirement. That's basically because SSA says, here's the pot of money we are designating to you, Sarah, and if you access that early, your monthly payment's going to be less because you're accessing it over a longer period of time. That is not true for SSDI. You can access SSDI at 40. And whatever your retirement would have been, that's what you're accessing the entire time. So you do not get slapped with the same penalty. The other thing that comes up with early retirement benefits is you are not eligible for Medicare until you're 65 regardless. Social Security disability insurance, of course, accessible to folks with enough credits who are under 66 and who are otherwise eligible. There is no penalty slapped on, so that monthly amount is higher. There are also other benefits that come into play. For example, survivors benefits or dependents benefits that may be helpful to folks in your family or in your household. I never want to tell somebody, you know, apply for ERB over SSDI or vice versa, because I do think it's a personal decision, of course. And there's so many factors at play, like how much time it's going to take, how much you're willing to put up with. But not getting hit with that penalty, I think, is a huge consideration. Lastly, here are a few tips for applying. So when you're talking to folks who are going through the process, who are considering getting things together, first tip is be organized. So collect all your relevant records ahead of time. You'll need a bunch of information. Be sure to have that before you submit your application. One thing that may come up is that doctors' offices, businesses, they change addresses, they change names, they change phone numbers. Make sure that all of that information is up to date and relevant. Don't trust that if the SSA doctor calls a doctor's office and they get a disconnected signal that they're going to put in the effort to find that doctor. You should do that ahead of time. In the application itself, be very clear and specific about your limitations and level of pain while being realistic. So this goes back to talking like SSA, right? Talking, being sure that you are extremely specific and clear in expressing what your limitations are, right? What does it look like for you after 30 minutes of sitting? What does it look like for you after 100 feet of walking? But also remain realistic. If you say that you have 10 out of 10 pain, SSA is going to assume you're hospitalized, right? If you're able to be home, and even if you're in I don't want to diminish the type of pain anybody experiences, but if SSA sees that and you are not hospitalized, that's going to be a problem, right? Because they have a specific definition of what it means to be experiencing 10 out of 10 pain. Don't leave things blank, right? I'm a lawyer. I'm happy to fill up any space given to me to plead a case. So be sure to fill out your application fully. And if you leave if there's something that you're not sure how to answer, be sure to find a way to plead your case in it. Only go to the doctor to complain. Megan said this to me once, and I thought it was one of my favorite quotes ever. When you are interacting with medical professionals, or if you are, a hospital social worker, and patients are talking to you about what it looks like, what their pain looks like, be sure to ask how folks are feeling overall and on average, right? You don't want your medical records to say that every time you came in, you were fine if you weren't, right? If you were able to go to the doctor, but for the 3 days before that, you were in bed because you couldn't get up, you need to tell your doctor that for the 3 days before that, you were in bed because you couldn't get up, right? Don't just go and say, I feel fine today. And then finally, after submitting that application, follow up with SSA, right? Really take that application into your own hands. Be sure to make sure that they are processing your application, they're processing it timely, and respond to SSA requests in a timely manner. Requests for more records, requests you see SSA doctors. Be sure to be in contact with SSA when it's necessary. So this is Megan and I's contact information. Please feel free to write it down. Reach out to us. We are here to talk about disability benefits and be a resource for folks who are considering applying or going through the application process, or who are helping folks who are going through the application process and considering applying. So please do not hesitate to reach out to us with questions. We are absolutely happy to speak with anybody. So please go ahead and write this down. And then with that, I just want to ask if there are any questions. We've got about 10 minutes left. I see, please explain circumstances under which people receive SSI and SSDI at the same time. So there are some circumstances. I think likely the most common one, because SSDI is based off of your past work history, you can have that past work history, but also not have the income and assets that make you eligible for SSI. So for example, if you apply for SSDI, say, and you get approved, but you are you're waiting on for that you've got that 5-month waiting period, you may get SSI to supplement you during that time. I think that's a pretty common way that it comes up, so long as you're eligible for both.
And also a lot of people can receive them like ongoing, but that's only if your SSDI payment is extremely low. So I've worked, like someone was approved, their SSDI was only like $325 per month. And like Sarah was saying, they didn't have the income and assets. So even with that $325 per month, they're under the income and asset limits for SSI. So they would be receiving SSI and SSDI concurrently. But the SSI payment would probably be around $300 to $400 as well. So in summary, the only time they receive both is if both payments are very low. If you're receiving SSI, your monthly income will not be over $800, no matter what combination of benefits you're receiving.
May I add one thing? And this was years ago when AIDS was definitely a fatal illness. But I had one guy, he was like $7 short or something on his SSD. And so his SSI was so valuable because he had Medicaid to pay any of the other stuff. So he was really lucky to be a little bit short.
Yeah, and that's something that we see come up a lot, is folks who specifically need Medicaid, maybe to access like an in-home care or something like that. And I think the key thing with SSI, so with SSI, right, when they do that equation, every single time your income changes, you should be on the phone with SSA to actually scratch that. You should be putting it in writing to let them know that your income has changed. And then they basically will lower your monthly payment by whatever that income is. That's a very simple way of explaining it, but that's basically how it works. But if you get to zero, you still get your Medicaid. They don't take away your healthcare.
I do want to, I was answering some questions in the chat, and there was one question about when folks apply with substance use disorders, and I kind of didn't have, I did a whole paragraph and I was like, okay, I'm talking in circles. I'll just answer that one. So when you're applying and you have a substance use disorder, if the condition is connected to your substance use, Social Security looks for you to be sober when you apply and throughout the application process. So for example, if you like, for example, working with someone who used cocaine